Social media is still the heart of the matter because what we found is if something goes to trial, jurors will believe social media data before they believe any other data because they understand it, they understand how it occurs, and that it's public. They were the ones whose bonus, their personal annual bonus, was tied to claims resolution. I am the CEO of Sniffr, which is an investigation firm that got its roots in social media investigation, which is something that's near and dear to my heart. There are multiple hundreds of communities on social media that teach you how to get a bigger settlement.
Hello, my name is Jason Reichl, and you're listening to Risk Management Brick by Brick. I'm fascinated with people who are helping build and maintain the physical world around us. On each episode of this podcast, we'll dive in with a risk manager, speak to them about how technology plays a role in this process.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me on another episode of Brick by Brick. I'm here with Marci. Marci, why don't you give the audience a little bit about your background and what you're doing now?
Sure, absolutely. So I am the CEO of Fraudster, which is an investigation firm that got its roots in social media investigation, which is something that's near and dear to my heart. This is my third startup. We recently sold into private equity and are investigating or enjoying the process of becoming part of a larger organization.
That's awesome. So love the name. How did you end up as CEO? So you said you've done a couple entrepreneur stints, so that's awesome. Let's dive into that a little bit. But was entrepreneurship always in the cards for you? Did you find that at some point in your life?
So I never considered myself to be an entrepreneur. Graduating from college, I thought that I would be a novelist. This is back in the 80s when novels were a thing.
Right.
But I wound up getting jobs and I found myself overperforming in the jobs. And not to toot my own horn, but if you look at statistically,
that's what you're here for.
Right? Never. I was outperforming all the people who had had my roles before, and my managers were becoming uncomfortable with my performance, and it just wasn't a good fit for me. So at some point, I just jumped out because I had discovered at that point search engine optimization, which was something that was super interesting to me. I figured that I would just explore that, whether or not there was a position for me. And that was the beginning of my first company. And I've never really looked back.
Great. So some success then in being interested in emerging problems, emerging areas where things need to be, let's say, controlled or have more insights, search engine optimization. Now you're doing investigations. That seems to be a thread through your entire career of being interested in getting to the facts. Do you feel like that's tied to your desire to be a writer in the past? I wanted to go to school for journalism before the bottom fell out in that, right? So right. I kind of have a similar story. So.
Right. Well, the novelist thing was really just to be famous because it was before social media, and that was the best way to become famous. Turns out I'm not famous, but I think I can live with that.
Good. Yeah. It's not everything that's cracked up to be the social media stuff sometimes.
Right.
Great. Okay. So then you started your first company, search engine optimization. Is that right when that's emerging as a thing people are considering?
So that was back in 1998. So I was working on the Yahoo directory because Google didn't exist yet.
Right. I remember that.
The crux of it for me, the thing that turns something from an idea to a business model is when you can tie it to revenue. So for instance, back in the 90s, people were building websites all over the place because they were told they had to, and they never made any money from that. So my position in the marketplace was to take that investment in your website, optimize it in search, so you start making money off from it. So with investigations, just to fast forward, people were doing investigative work, but they weren't getting actionable information from it. So it was a waste of money. So our company takes the data that you can find and ties it into a reduction in award or a reduction in timeline, therefore making money. So once you have an idea that you can tie to massive amounts of money or loss of prior investment money,
Yep.
You start being able to generate a client base and things kind of go from there.
Yeah. So let's talk about the current company, Fraud Sniffr, and talk about, you said it started with the social media. You probably, and that makes total sense. Were your clients then insurance carriers, brokers? Who were you servicing them to in the beginning?
So our first client was somebody on the front lines. So a risk manager from a self-insured, or I think they were a high deductible insured. But it was their own company money on the line for all of these claims that were just taking years and years and years to resolve. They were the ones whose bonus, their personal annual bonus, was tied to claims resolution. And they were the first ones to jump on because, again, they'll make more money if we're successful for them.
Amazing. Okay. And so as that business has evolved, I'm sure the social media part of it is still an important part. Where are you guys today, and where is fraud going? Where does it need to be sniffed to, so to speak?
Nice. Bringing in the company name.
Yeah, trying.
So social media is still the heart of the matter, because what we found is if something goes to trial, jurors will believe social media data before they believe any other data.
Yeah.
Because they understand it, they understand how it occurs, and that it's public. Fraud is changing in that fraudsters are becoming more analog in their fraud. So for instance, they'll buy license plates at a garage sale or at a flea market and put those on their car. So there's no sales receipt, there's nothing. And then when you try to search the plates using standardized, databases of license plates, they're not in there.
Right.
So they're trying to maybe avoid tolls by putting this fake license plate on there, but then they get in an accident with a semi-tractor trailer. And then now all of a sudden they can make this huge insurance claim because nobody really knows who they are or where they come from. So
do you see that a lot of fraud is done in the way that you just described, that the fraud itself is buying the license plates to try to get around the tolls, but then something else happens, and because of this other fraud that's not related to the accident or incident, they sort of have a cover. Do you find that these people who you're investigating, who are actually guilty of not being honest, do you find it's sort of sometimes that story where it's a one thing that is tangentially related to the actual claim itself, or is it a lot of people actually going out and doing things in order to commit insurance fraud or
right, so it's a little bit of both, right? There's a certain population of the country that likes to hide their license plates just as a matter of course, and they might accidentally wind up in this larger and then there's a real specific portion of the population that is going out intentionally to have these accidents. And then the people who are more intentional about it do a little bit better job of covering their tracks, but also are substantially more guilty. And they think that their cover-up methods are foolproof. And it turns out that they're not. So when we do discover their social media profile or their lifestyle profile, we can really dig in and get all kinds of stuff.
Right. And there's the photo of the car with the right license plate on it when they bought it, as an example, right? With a different license plate.
Yeah. Or that license plate on 10 other cars that are also registered to them.
Oh, yes. Right. Yep. Let's get into some questions I have, because I'm really interested in this. This is the first time I've had an investigation firm on it, especially one that's doing stuff with technology, right? In order to find this. So how do you see generative AI transforming fraud investigations, especially for insurance carriers analyzing social media data, right? So, there's this big scary thing I keep reading in Economist and other things about generative AI, and that we're going to live in a world of deep fakes and, all of this stuff. So how are you preparing, or how can you imagine or have already seen this generative AI taking a hold in your investigations?
So, that's a pretty big question, right? I could talk for maybe 6 hours about that.
Let's go.
Yeah.
After you just keep an extended podcast, we'll just do it in parts.
Right. It'll be just grab a cup of coffee. Here we go.
Exactly.
So generative AI, first of all, is something that the insurance carriers are very concerned about. They don't want us to use it. They don't want it in our reporting to them. And the reason for that is, at this point, generative AI is making a little bit of an echo chamber unto itself, because people are using generative AI And then the generative AI is using the generative AI
That's
content.
creating slop for any of the listeners who don't know about when that happens, right? So it's when AI feeds information to another AI and it creates something on top of that. It's not generating it from a source material, so to speak.
Correct. So carriers are real super not interested in having that happen. The other thing we want to make sure that doesn't happen is that the using AI so much takes away time.
Mm-hmm.
So let me give you an example. My accounting software just decided yesterday that it needed to put AI on my invoicing. So every time you open an invoice, you have to wait 45 seconds for the generative AI to tell you what to do with the invoice. And I'm like, maybe I don't need to know what you think I should do with my invoice.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, sometimes it can really slow you down. Sometimes it's amazing. Like I had a photo of a crime scene and the generative AI pointed out a gun in the weeds and I didn't see it because it was black gun and black weeds. But because it's looking at it differently with like a different kind of eyeball, I mean, that was super helpful.
Yes. Right.
So we like it, but we can't trust it.
So you're using it more for the investigative part as a tool for maybe looking at information, but you're not using it for your findings or generative to your clients because your clients need human factual evidence based on what you believe is to be evidence, not something that you can't back up. And that's probably the value for these organizations of bringing in a third party is that you're getting another human opinion about the situation in the investigation. So that makes sense. And it's good to know that you're using it as a tool and those more practical applications of it. The gun example is an amazing story. I've talked to a few other claims and those kind of things. And and maybe you guys are doing this too, but when, let's say the stuff that you're not doing for your clients, but all the information that you guys gather, are you able to use that information with something like AI and potentially find new patterns or new themes that are emerging that maybe you don't know in the micro moment when you're investigating that investigation? Because I have to imagine that investigations are that case or that investigation and something that's happening above everything else, because that's going to lead to what the next cases are going to be or the next investigations need to do.
Right. So you're talking about crime rings. And we have had a solution for crime rings before generative AI came out. It's good old fashioned data mining. But, we can add a bot onto it, because we've got so many hundreds of thousands of files in our system right now. And that's all mineable or AI-able data. And so we do put a couple bots on it to see if they can find relationships. And what we'll find is there's a really good example is there was a married couple who got divorced, and the ex-husband was up in Maine and he had a swoop and squat accident, got a big settlement. And then 6 months later, his ex-wife in Florida, same thing. So we were able to tie those two together, even though it was a different trucking company, different carrier, different everything, because we had the data and the fact that in social media, they were listed together as ex-wife and ex-husband. That really was the pin that put it together.
Now, in that case, as you go, and maybe you can't talk about this part of it, but just because it's so interesting, taking it back to the writing aspect that we were talking about earlier, were those two people working together to defraud this, or was there someone that had this defrauding incident and then because they saw the windfall, then a similar thing happens there? Does social media create these ideas and put these ideas in people's heads, I guess, is the bigger question I'm asking?
There's a whole community. There are multiple hundreds of communities on social media that teach you how to get a bigger settlement. Most of those have been launched by plaintiffs' attorneys who are looking for new clients. So they'll tell you, if you've had any kind of fender bender, even if they just, scratch the rear view, the side mirror on your car, you can get, $1 million out of it. You could get a perm total loss out of that. And then they coach how to start your claim, what to say to the adjusters, and on and on and on and on. So that does exist. As far as
it's kind of like an agent for fraud in a way, right? Like they're telling you all the right things to say. They're coaching you so that you can get the most out of it. Now, I have to imagine that if you're taking a double-edged sword there, it's not all fraud. I mean, sure, some of that stuff exists because people didn't understand these systems that they were getting themselves into, and potentially they did need help to get what they needed out of the insurance company for the accident or claim that they were in. But then it was so lucrative, these mechanisms, that then other people started using them and actually putting fraud in place, right? I think that's one of the hard things when you start looking at claims. And there's just as many people that believe that insurance companies are looking for every reason not to pay you when you deserve it. That hasn't been my experience. I'm in the insurance industry, right? And so I stand up for that. Most of the time, the people that I interact with and associate with have high moral and ethical standards and do believe in the value of insurance and that it should pay for people when they need it. And if they have the right insurance, right?
Yeah,
so I live in a
100%.
world where I think of insurance as ethical, but there are a lot of people out there who believe insurance is not ethical,
Well, then,
or that maybe those carriers or brokers are hiring organizations to not find the fraud. In reality, what I find is it very much is about trying to not allow the bad apples who are doing fraud to get into the system and mess up your actuary model and do all these things for the insurance carriers that then increase premiums for everyone. It does come from, I think, a good place. Can you talk to how you look at ethics in a way in this job when you are talking about fraud? Because people are breaking the law when they do fraud, right?
Well,
So I'm
some
just
of them
interested
are.
in that kind of, how do you piece all that together, and what information is valuable and what information is maybe ethically exposing? I guess I'm asking about privacy in social media, privacy in the world of AI on top of your job. So, I mean, what recommendations do you have for people for keeping themselves safe on these platforms?
Let me take it back a little bit first. Let's talk about the investigation and the insurance perspective and the client perspective, the claimant perspective. Our system and our heart is in truth, right? We are not in the business of life ruining. We're not in the business of being on anybody's side. To be perfectly candid, you can't be an ethical investigator if you're on somebody's side. So, as an ethical investigation company, we take all the information that we find, warts and all. If it shows that the claimant is genuinely injured and has a solid, stable family life, especially if there was a death in the claim, anything that is about the claim or the family or anything that's relevant, we put it all in there. Sometimes it's not in the best interest of our client to receive that information, but we can't not deliver that. So, in the instance where someone is not super interested in recovering from their injury, we also have a lot of off-ramps that we provide. So, for instance, if they're talking to a plaintiff's attorney and the plaintiff's attorney is encouraging them to prolong their injury,
Yeah.
our reporting gives an off-ramp for that claimant to stop it. So, for
Yeah.
instance, we call them table sliders. It's photos and ongoing pieces of information because, as you know, social media is ongoing.
Right.
So a claim can take, 2 years to resolve sometimes. And in the middle, the adjuster can run an update from our system. And if it shows the claimant riding a bicycle, for example, the adjuster has the opportunity then to email them that picture and say, hey, saw this, how you feeling? Which gives that claimant an off-ramp. Oh, I'm feeling better. Maybe it's time to close the claim. Or, yeah, I rode my bicycle, but the next day I felt terrible.
Mm-hmm.
So with that kind of ongoing dialogue during the claim with visual, media, it helps to, make everybody a little bit more honest.
Yeah, it feels a lot like the world of mediation in a way, right? You're bringing the evidence so that mediation can happen, and holding both sides up to some ethical standard, which is something that I really value about third-party investigation firms, who are ethical, and why I wanted to bring this up in this conversation, because I think that's a incredibly important element that makes the insurance industry work, which is when you insure someone and then someone has something happen, those two parties can sometimes be in a disagreement on what is the fair and ethical thing to do in that situation. And I think you need mediators, investigators, all of these things in order to come to a good conclusion for everyone, right? And hopefully it's not fraud.
And if everyone's ethical, then hopefully we never get to court. Because
Right.
once you get to court, it's anybody's game.
Yeah, that becomes a different thing, right? Absolutely. Let's talk about how in your journey and even in this company, how have things really matured? And what kind of advice are you giving to, your clients now around how can they position themselves or ready themselves for what's going to be the next set of fraud?
Oh, well, what we're telling them is investigate everybody. It used to be we would only investigate the plaintiff or we would only investigate the claimant. I think we should investigate all the doctors that they're treating with, all of the witnesses that are showing up for a court case, all the expert witnesses, for sure we should be investigating. Just taking a look at every single player and the personal relationships between those players can be really illuminating.
Amazing. That's really interesting. I think that's interesting. So expanding the scope of the investigation because there's a lot of players. When you say that, I have a question about you. So I've interviewed safety personnel, I've interviewed police officers, ex-Marines, and a lot of their careers have really influenced the way that they look at the world. Has doing this job and running this organization influenced the way that you look at people, or and is it in a positive light? Is it in a negative light? Being interested in that truth, what can you how has your worldview changed since you've been CEO of this company and on this journey with what you're doing with this organization?
Well, there's two things. First of all, I'm very, very cautious of what I put online.
Well,
and
good.
I'm very
Thank you for doing this then.
Right. Very cautious for my kids and give them a lot of advice about what not to do. Second piece, I can't listen to rap music anymore because most of the claimants who are malingering are trying to start a rap career. And they're doing all these YouTube videos, and it's really bad rap. It's really.
Oh yeah, that sounds painful. That sounds painful. I love that. You want to play a game of Risky or Too Risky with me?
Let's do it.
Okay, so I have a set of questions that are here that are about the world that you exist in, and if you find the thing risky or too risky, and sometimes that will change. So. I'll give you the example. Should we empower AI to flag patterns that are technically illegal, that aren't technically illegal, but look suspicious? Where does ethical oversight come in? Is that is that risky or irresponsible to allow AI to flag patterns that aren't technically illegal, but look suspicious?
Oh, no, I think they should absolutely do that.
You think that's a responsible use of AI?
Yeah.
Great.
As long as there's a human review, obviously.
What about profiling potential fraudsters before a crime? Risky or necessary?
Dumb.
So you don't believe that we should be headed to a world with AI being like precognitive, Minority Report style, that. No. There is a good use of this that I just hosted someone on the podcast who they have AI technology in factories, and the cameras watch people. And if someone's slouching over, it alerts the foreman that, hey, that person might need to take a break because they're more likely to have an accident, right? So that is precognitive, but it's not fraud, right? It's done for the act of safety. So maybe there's still room in this world for AI, I think, to maybe potentially pattern out things and alert people, but maybe not in the world of fraud. Maybe we should.
Just real quick, think about the numbers. They'd have to be looking at absolutely everyone in the United States, because at any time, any of us could have that accident. And
there's a lot of conversations happening in some of the forums I'm on about putting AI in traffic, like every cam being put into every, stoplight, right? Which already happens. We can already, I've been on a couple cases where, we're looking at footage taken from, traffic control essentially, but putting AI on top of it to be like, hey, this person's ran this yellow light and this yellow light. Oh, we should start following them is kind of, I think, where this thing is coming up, where I wanted to kind of get your opinion on it.
Well, and those are all really good examples. I was taking it from the perspective of, is this person likely to malinger on an injury? That would be
right. Exactly.
It would be difficult to quantify that.
Replacing whistleblowers with AI, risky or efficient?
Oh, efficient.
Efficient, yeah. I think, does that mean the government should put AI to look for these examples on on businesses' tax returns? Like, wow, that's going to be a really crazy next 10 years that we live in, I think, around how do we get regulatory AI in place? Not just how do we regulate AI, but how do we then use AI to regulate things that we want to regulate, but we don't have the human capacity to do.
the flip side of it is if the AI makes a mistake, there has to be an appeals process.
Right. Exactly. That is kind of where we need to get to. This is not something I think you believe in, but there's a lot of claim management tools out there or claim tools out there right now that say, hey, don't ever touch this claim. We'll make a decision on it. So not disclosing when AI makes the call to deny a claim, is that risky or strategic silence?
Not disclosing when AI makes a decision?
Yeah, on a claim. So this is more about claims and things like that because we have a lot of people asking about, oh, well, I don't even need humans to review my claims anymore. I'll just use this AI model to review the claim and it will make a determination if it needs to go to a human or not.
Well, I think that it should only be disclosed if it's going to court or if it's challenged. There's no reason to disclose it earlier than that.
Right. So only if it's then being put in as evidence or is material to the case.
For sure.
I know that you have a co-founder and your brother. So building a company with your brother, risky or rewarding?
A little bit of both. I got to know him a lot better. As you get older, your relationships with your siblings can get a little bit stale or distant. And
not happening when you work with them, right?
Right. We've been on the phone with each other every 2 hours for the last 13 years. So I know him better than I ever have before. So that's been a real highlight, and the reward has been, that we've had a real frictionless relationship. The risk is, if things don't go super well, it has a lot of extra ramifications. So
yeah, right.
It kind of puts you on your best behavior, right?
That's good that you react that way. Some people react where it puts them on their worst behavior, right? Their most childish behavior. So I guess the maturity of yourself to be able to keep that distance, but also maintain that this is someone that's more important than the thing you're doing now, hopefully, right? As your relationship should take priority. That's a hard one for a lot of people. There's sage advice of not going into business with people that you are in love with, being family or a spouse or something like that.
Yes,
but it is very rewarding. I've done a couple businesses with close people and it's always been incredibly rewarding to me and risky. I'm not going to lie about that.
Well, and the other piece of it is when you're an entrepreneur and you don't have anyone on your team and you don't have any clients, who are you going to hire? Who's going to want to jump on that ship?
Absolutely. This is a question that I ask CEOs when I have them on this, which is taking a digital detox as a tech CEO or as any kind of CEO. Is that risky or rejuvenating?
It would be rejuvenating if it was possible. I literally just got back from Greece on Thursday. It took 10 days and I was trying to detox, but there's things that you have to do.
Yeah.
So,
right.
Yeah.
And there's nothing scarier to a CEO than I think being a roadblock for people on your team.
100%.
I think no one ever talks about that. That's the real CEO's problem is that you don't have any specific job. Your job is to fill in all the gaps and also keep things moving fluidly within your organization, right? So I think ultimately there's a whole responsibility that sometimes means it's like parenthood. You have to be available, right?
All the time, 24/7.
This is something you talked about since you're, safe about your social media use and what you put on there. Is sharing your entrepreneurial journey on social media risky or inspiring?
Well, I like to think of it as inspiring. But, as an entrepreneur, and when your interest is in something real specific, but not necessarily industry specific,
yeah,
it can look like you're all over the place.
Yeah.
But, when you dive into it, I've spent my whole career at this intersection of people, software, and money.
Yeah.
Right in there, always in there. So that makes a lot of sense to me. But you look at the titles and the companies, and one of them is marketing and one of them is investigative work. And,
Right. A difference between a field of industry and a area of interest, right? Mm-hmm. And careers can take both shapes. I definitely relate to that because for me, my driving force is the intersection of technology and manufacturing or creating the built world, right? So I'm very interested in using technology as a tool, not technology as an escape mechanism. So I'm not super big on social media, although I do social media because you have to manage your brand these days. It is very interesting to think like, oh, my interest is really in when real world tools or technology needs technology in order to evolve or be safer. That's really where my interests come in play. And I have a deep expertise in that area. But if you look at it from the outside, it seems like, oh, Jason must be interested in cutting edge technology, which is not actually the case. Right.
And technology for technology's sake is the biggest mistake you can make.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I believe that. This has been just a great conversation. I love bringing people into the podcast who risk managers interact with and understand more about how their businesses operate and the value that they think they're adding to the insurance ecosystem. It's very, very vast. I said before we started the show, we have a lot of people from different risk management schools listening to the podcast. What's a piece of advice you would give to yourself early on in your career that you think would have made things a little bit easier of a journey for yourself?
The best advice is to trust yourself. At the end of the day, it's on your shoulders anyway, and you're going to do the work, but just trust yourself. Don't worry so much.
Yeah. I love the idea of, you're the one at the controls, right? You really need to advice, information, YouTube videos, all these things that we use as experts. There are experts out in the world, but you're the one that has to, push the button, so to speak. And so you should take personal accountability in that, and also know that that means if you're not enjoying what you're doing, or you don't work for the boss that you want to be working for, find another job. Go out there and really put yourself out there. There's a lot of opportunity, specifically in insurance, specifically in the ecosystems that we both work in. And it's amazing. It's constantly evolving. I tell people all the time when I say, well, I work for an insurtech company, and they go, oh, that must be boring. I go, absolutely. It's been the most exciting job I've ever had, because the industry itself is evolving so fast, and the way that this industry works are evolving so fast. And you're dealing with people who have deep expertise meeting technology head on, right? And sometimes there's friction there, but I really, really enjoy trying to turn it into something that's more harmonious, right? Instead of that friction. Yeah. So I really appreciate your conversation today, and I look forward to seeing you soon.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you, Marci. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Risk Management Brick by Brick is brought to you by TrustLayer. Find out how TrustLayer manages risk so that the people can build the physical world around us. Head over to TrustLayer.io, and then make sure to subscribe to Risk Management Brick by Brick on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. On behalf of the TrustLayer team, thank you for listening.